Earlier today, I spoke with Maryland Governor Wes Moore about the shutdown. Here is our conversation. We are in the midst of the shutdown. There seems to be no end in sight. We know this directly impacts Maryland. You have more than 260,000 federal employees, more than 200,000 contractors. A number of federal agencies are set up there in Maryland. So, how much longer realistically can this go on before you're sort of in a crisis mode?
Yeah, the thing that we have seen is that this is not new for the state of Maryland. This is not some form of deviation. Frankly, this is just a continuation of what has been happening to Maryland by the Trump administration and by this federal government ever since January, where we've now lost over 15,000 federal workers that Donald Trump has fired that live in the state of Maryland. We've had government contracts being canceled. We've had agencies that have attempted to be shuttered. Western Maryland has had federal disaster relief denied because they are in Maryland. So, I mean, so we've just seen this continuation that has happened. The thing that I think that people know about us is that we're not flinching, though. And I'm always going to defend Marylanders. And that's why, as soon as the federal government shutdown went into action, I then signed a whole series of executive orders that made sure we were doing things like working with the private sector to ensure that there were going to be no evictions or no utility shutoffs for federal government workers during this time, that we would be able to backfill for as long as we could supports for things like Medicaid and SNAP and TANF for people in the state of Maryland, that we could continue things like our Feds to Eds initiative, which is a groundbreaking initiative where we're getting federal workers who are interested in getting an education, cutting the red tape, streamlining them to getting them into available essential state jobs immediately, like education. And so we're never going to stop fighting for the people of our state. We just wish to fight for the people of our state did not always mean having to be in a fight with Washington, D.C.
Much longer can this fight go on? We remember the last time it went on for more than a month.
Yeah.
Can you bear that sort of that length of time this time around?
Well, we're always going to make sure that Marylanders are okay. But, it's important for people to remember who's getting hurt by this. We're talking about people, in many cases, people who are still going to work right now. This morning, I was with our congressional delegation at BWI Thurgood Marshall Airport. And we saw people there who were the air traffic controllers. We saw people there who were focusing on security inside the airport. We saw people there who were working vending and making sure that people had food. We saw people there who were cleaning the airport and making sure that it is beautiful as visitors and people come into the airport. And the one thing that we knew about almost all of them is that most of them weren't getting paid. They were just showing up to their job because they know their work is essential. And we've seen that from federal government workers all across the state, people who are doing things like making sure our food is safe, making sure our critical infrastructure is protected, making sure that veterans like myself, veterans who came home and needed medication, that they could get their medication, right? That's what they are doing. And that's who this federal government shutdown is harming. And so the message that I sent to Donald Trump and the message that I sent to Washington, D.C. earlier today was this: stop this shutdown, end it, and do it now, because you are hurting the people of our state. And while you are the ones who are causing it, we are the ones who now have to deal with it.
Democrats in Congress and the Senate should still hold out when it comes to health care?
Yeah, I think we need to end this. I think we need to end the shutdown. I think we need to reopen the government. But I also know that a prerequisite for reopening the government should not be asking for people's premiums to go up 70, 80, 90% for their health care. That a prerequisite to reopen the government should not be kicking off in the case of Maryland, tens of thousands of Marylanders off of health care. The most recent bill that was passed is now going to essentially work to end health care for over 250,000 Marylanders. I mean, it is insane what is happening to healthcare within our country and what the federal government is doing to healthcare within the state of Maryland. And so I don't think that if that's what reopening the federal government looks like, kicking people off of healthcare and jacking up their premiums, I just find that to be deeply inhumane. And also, I just find it to be deeply un-American.
Speaking of talking or helping some of those workers who are on the job right now and not getting paid or furloughed, you introduced a loan program to help some Marylanders, 700 bucks, no interest, got to pay it back within 45 days. The president has talked about not giving some of those workers back pay. So, can Maryland take that risk right now? Who's to say you're going to get that money back?
Well, listen, I think it's unfortunate because this is just a continuation of the assault on the middle class that the president of the United States continues to do, and maybe because he's never lived in the middle class, and doesn't understand what it means to go paycheck for paycheck, doesn't understand that when prices rise, that stretches budgets, particularly for families that actually have to look at how much things cost. And they're noticing that, for example, since the president of the United States has been inaugurated, that energy prices in Maryland have gone up 20%. That we are now watching the price of food, the price of clothes, the price of electronics being jacked up. That we are watching how things are seemingly more unaffordable. And that's happening at the same time when he has chosen to lay off and fire tens of thousands of workers. And so, so it's. I know that in this time, we're going to do everything in our power to make sure we're fighting for middle class families, making sure we're fighting for working families, to make things more affordable for the people of our state, and that includes being creative about everything from affordable drug prices to energy prices to making sure we can raise a minimum wage for people. But I also know that that does not seem to be the priority for the president or this administration.
So the Marylanders who, before this shutdown, they would mention that, they're struggling to make ends meet, not only because of what's happening at the federal level, but also at the state level. Some of these fees, like car registration fees, they're struggling to get by.
Yeah. And that's why we've made it a clear focus of being able to cut taxes for the middle class. We know that, for example, some of the fees are just fees that just go up every year with inflation. And when you're watching inflation jump, the way that inflation has jumped over the process of these past couple years, you have seen how you watch fees that increase systematically to pay for things like road construction and pay for things like bridges and tunnels, that you've seen those fees increase for people because inflation just continues to rise. And so that's why we're going to do everything that we can on the state level of being able to cut taxes for the middle class, which is what we've been able to do. And also ask those who have done very, very well, that we are asking them to invest a little bit more to be able to make sure that we can have world-class schools and have the best public schools inside the country, and not have to lay off our police officers or our firefighters. What we've seen from the federal government has actually in many cases been the absolute opposite, where they have spent their time giving a tax cut to millionaires and rising prices on everyone else. And so we just have a very different philosophy from the federal administration about what it means to support working class families and try to make life a little bit more affordable for them.
So we know a lot is happening across the country right now. And not only do you have this shutdown, but you're also looking at the president's use of the National Guard. We know that hundreds of them are stationed outside of Chicago right now. The president threatened to send them to Portland. They've been here in D.C. for a while. He threatened to send them to Baltimore. What do you make of the president's continued threats and use of the National Guard?
Well, the president seems to have a fascinating fetishization of people in uniform, and which is deeply odd and disturbing. But also, it's this hyper polarization of the military, which is someone who served in the military, someone who led soldiers in combat overseas. I also find to be deeply problematic because he's talking about soldiers like they are toy soldiers, like this is like a Christmas gift that he has, without understanding these are real lives. These are citizen soldiers, people who have jobs, people who have families, people who have commitments back at home, and are now being asked, by the way, and the taxpayers are paying well over $1 million a day for this, and are now being asked to perform municipal policing functions in a way that is not their job description and is not why they signed up, and particularly to do it against American citizens. That is not why we took the oath. And so when I am watching these actions that are taking place, not only is it a hyperpolarization of military efforts, which are deeply problematic, we're also seeing it's not effective. And if you want to be serious about actually fighting crime, then you should look at some of the things that we're doing in the state of Maryland. Part of the reason that Maryland's having amongst the fastest drops in violent crime anywhere in the United States of America, doing things like making historic investments in local law enforcement, historic investments in technology and predictive analytics, working with our mayor and our county executives to fund things like community violence intervention groups and community groups, and knowing that much of the violence is retaliatory and there is actually a way of dealing with that. If the federal government wanted to actually be helpful and wanted to invest in things like license plate readers and invest in things like eliminating Glock switches and invest in things like FBI and ATF bureaus in our local jurisdictions, I am more than willing to have that conversation with the President of the United States. But I do not believe that we should be talking about deploying military personnel in our cities and to do something that is deeply performative instead of actually focusing on performance.
What's your biggest concern right now when it comes to some of the actions of the Trump administration?
Well, I think the actions, the concerns are plentiful,
Hmm.
but a lot of them just come back to the fact that we're watching just a flouting of the law. That anyone who is missing the fact that this administration just is continually not just stretching the law, but in many cases breaking it. And these actions are just deeply, deeply challenging. And so the thing that I know is that I'm never going to bend the knee. I'm never going to stop defending the people of Maryland. I'm never going to stop fighting for my people. I'm just built that way. And I know that history is not going to remember this administration well. But for those who are bending the knee and capitulating, history will remember them worse.
We're about a little more than a year away from midterm elections. We know there's a lot of talk right now about these congressional districts and redrawing some of these maps. You told Face the Nation a couple of weeks ago that you're seriously considering that in Maryland. This will primarily impact GOP rep Andy Harris in his district. Is that still on the table right now? Are you still looking at this? We know political analysts have said this is a slippery slope. So do you think this is the right move?
Yeah, I believe that Maryland should have fair maps, and I think we should have representatives. We should have people choosing their representatives, and not representatives choosing their people. And I know that what we are seeing right now is Donald Trump is calling up individual states and picking and choosing which states that he believes should have fair maps, and I just find that to be deeply problematic. And so my point is this: is that if Donald Trump is calling up certain states to ask the question, do you have fair maps? Then I think all of us have the right to say, do we have a fair map? And so I do not think this is about going after one particular congressman or one particular seat. This is about making sure we're lifting up the hopes and the aspirations and the vote of everybody in the state of Maryland, and making sure that we have maps that are fair, that come November, people will have a chance to have their voices heard.
All right, finally, Governor, as I mentioned before, it looks like this shutdown is not going to come to an end anytime soon. What's your message if the president is watching this right now? What do you say to him? And also, what do you say to some of your Democratic colleagues in the Senate?
My message to the president is simple: stop this shutdown. Stop trying to gut healthcare for the people of this country, and then using a government shutdown as a way of being able to do so. Stop the assault on our state. I'm thankful that here in Maryland, we are fighting back and we're pushing back and we're leading. And as one person told me, where I know she spoke for all of us when she was talking about everything taking place and how aggressive the state has been to help support, where she just simply said, thank God we're in Maryland.
Mm.
And my message to Marylanders is this: thank God we're in Maryland, and we're never going to stop fighting for you.
And do you tell your Democratic colleagues in the Senate or Democrats in the Senate to keep going, keep pushing forward when it comes to healthcare, or do they need to back down and have these negotiations after the government reopens?
No, I say the same message that I said the Democrats who represent Maryland and the Democrats who represent the country, is that we do not want to be in a government shutdown. I did not want the government to shut down. I knew the impact that this would have on the people of our state, and we are already seeing the deep and dark impacts on the people of our state. I also know that having the government open should not have as a prerequisite kicking people off of healthcare. And having the government open should not have as a prerequisite, let's just jack up people's premiums by 80, 90%. That's just so deeply cruel, and it's deeply unfair.
All right, Governor, I appreciate your time.